Hello, everyone, and welcome to Musing, music for the adventurous listener here on CJSW 90.9 FM in Calgary. I'm your host, Janna Sailor, and on today's program, I'm delighted to bring you a conversation with composer, pianist, and improviser extraordinaire, Mark Limacher. Mark is a JUNO award-winning pianist, composer, improviser, arranger, and genre-crossing musician, currently based in Calgary, Canada. He's a graduate of New School University in New York City and has studied privately with composers Linda Catlin Smith and Lawrence Crane. In 2013, he served as apprentice to composer Benita Marcus in Brooklyn, New York. Mark has been a featured artist in residence with Festival of the Sound and the National Arts Center Orchestra as part of their Music Alive program. His arrangements and orchestrations have been heard in collaboration with vocalist Caity George, vocalist and playwright Allison Lynch, vocalist Alan Doty, Kensington Sinfonia, Theatre Calgary, and the Calgary Philharmonic Orchestra. So welcome, Mark. So thrilled to have you here on Musing. I have to say that I am most pleased to have you here because you are one of the busiest humans I know. There was some catching involved, so I'm feeling quite accomplished to actually have you physically in the same space as me and breathing the same air.
Well, I'm honored, and also I'm very happy to be back here at CJSW because there's a certain nostalgia for me walking up the stairs to get here, reminding me of the wonderful years I spent with our dear friend and colleague Laura Reed doing the show here on CJSW, and it's been an amazing little moment to come through those doors, and here we are, and so I'm very happy.
Oh, amazing. And that was a bright and early show, if I
That's
recall
right.
correctly.
It was 4 a.m. to 4:15 a.m. We had to pack. No, it was actually it was. There were two time slots. I think originally it was 5:30 to 7, and then it was 7 to 10.
Okay.
Eventually.
Okay. A bit more civilized. But we're very civilized. It's in the middle of the day.
That's right. That was the morning drive time, and I like to do fake traffic reports until the cease and desist. Yeah. So that was fun.
And I have to say that was one of my favorite little indulgences when I got to tune in to you guys giving your fake traffic reports. That's and right. The competitions to see how old you were. People could tell how old you were by just listening to your voice.
That's right. And that was back when the apartment still had the buzzer code 5051. And that was the joke then, is it's like someone guessing my age. Like, what is more, 50, 51.
51-ish.
Yeah.
No codes. You need it's so secure around here now.
I'm 15.
And Mark is 15. Because you truly are a myth and a legend around here. And you and your mad skills, you defy description. But I'm going to start with a question that I ask so many of my guest creators, is that how do you describe yourself as an artist and your creative output, which is truly so multifaceted?
Oh, my God. And we only have an hour of the show?
We only have an hour.
Yeah. That is very hard. There's a certain practical reality. I play the piano a lot, and that becomes an obvious first way in. I love, by the way, the dog chewing.
Dog. I'm sorry if you can hear chewing.
I'm really into it. I just want to make sure people don't think it's me.
Says Winnie, the support dog, is really enjoying it.
I do feel supported.
Yeah, okay, wonderful.
I'm not going to lie. I feel very welcome and supported. So playing the piano is somehow involved in there, but that causes a lot of psychological mix-up for me because I never trained to be a pianist, and I really, if I have to be frank, feel always a little bit like I'm going to be found out one day because there are real pianists in the world, and I watch them, and I am in awe of them, and don't confuse me with them. That's the internal struggle there.
I think we all have that imposter.
The imposter,
It
that's
never
right.
really goes away, even when you're 50, 51.
That's right, I know. Maybe when I'm 60, 61, we'll be over it. So there's that, but then there's also the fact that I write a lot of music. And so you might think, oh, you just say you're a composer. But the problem there is, once again, I'm working in often opposing fields audience-wise. So I arrange a lot of music for singers, and in particular Caity George. And so that tends to have a sort of classic, love the sound, classic studio orchestra.
She's noisier than usual today.
No, it's actually, this is the appropriate companion for me right now. I feel I love it. So that has a classic studio orchestra vibe. Think the traditional pop singers of the 50s and things. But then my other totally legitimate passion that I try to do as much as possible is some kind of contemporary chamber music and writing for small orchestras and things, and that those audiences are not really the same. Nor
a lot of crossover.
Yes. So that's also a bit of a internal battle. Like, which of these things, I'm not really sure. I write music and I play the piano sometimes. And I like how deflating that is to feel
You
that
distilled
way.
it down to something very minimalist there. Because you, as you mentioned, you work in the classical scene. You have mad skills as a performer. You're in the jazz and improv scene. You work in musical theater and as a composer and arranger. That's such a diverse skill set. How do you go about developing yourself in all those different ways? Like, I've gone over to your house and watched you improvise on operatic themes. And then you have this innate knowledge of just so many musical genres and eras. Like, it's such a diverse skill set. How did you go about developing yourself in so many ways?
That's one of those things. You wake up and suddenly that's the reality. I love all of those kinds of music, especially from a historical standpoint. So I'll be pretty upfront that something like musical theater, I know the older material fairly well. I don't really resonate, or it doesn't resonate with me, the modern thing, so I'm pretty ignorant on a lot of that. But the one thing that connects that with, say, my equal passion with something like Ligeti is that I have always been very obsessed with orchestral music. That is my deep passion since I was 3 years old. I wanted to learn the violin at 3 because I wanted to sound like these Puccini recordings with Carillon, and that's not possible. You sound terrible, and I couldn't.
4 years,
That's right. And I'm thinking, this sucks. What's going on here? But the passion for that music and that sound is what has always driven me. I'm obsessive and fanatical about orchestration, and I love thinking about it and studying scores and things. The reality is, I'm not sure I actually differentiate between the stylistic, like the artifice of these things that is clearly different. That's the front-facing thing about it, but really they're functioning in my head in the same way. Different approaches to harmony and melody are clearly different, but I don't know, it's just instruments making sounds together, and I've always really loved that. That evolved into a passion about a microscopic sense of that. When I was a teenager and got into things like Feldman, and you could hear single timbres for a while. That is so vexing and beautiful.
That purity,
right.
Pure listening.
And somebody might remark that has absolutely nothing in common with the Conrad Salinger orchestrations for MGM or something. So, yeah, I guess, but it's also... I think both of them probably had the same comprehension of sounds that instruments make. And that passion is the core of all of it. Playing the piano is much more utilitarian a story because I never meant to be a pianist. I didn't think I was ever good enough to be one. And now that I do that and I'm terrified every time I do it, I think there's a sense of what kinds of piano sounds do I like. And those tend to alienate me from a lot of commercial musicians because I like very soft, pure sorts of lingering sounds, which don't obviously lend themselves to jazz when you're browbeaten by a kind of aggressive, male-dominated jazz peer culture, which is not my jam. But the piano is just another kind of sound. It's a frustrating instrument. It is not an orchestra, and that is always annoying to me. How do you develop this? I don't know. I really think it's not on purpose. You just wake up one day and it's over.
Because I do when I've experienced you as a performer many times, and then in the past couple of years, I've started to discover your compositions, and it was very different world from what I've experienced of you working together. And
yes, and you've been on some of the recording sessions. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, tell me about maybe that more traditional compositional path that you pursued for a while, and some of those influences, and how that manifests, or perhaps doesn't. Perhaps you worked in that genre and then moved away from some of those aesthetics that are evident in your work now.
Any of that traditional compositional training, to me, is universal. I think that's in everything that I think about. That, my initial desire was when I was a teenager, I was into very avant-garde classical music, and I thought it would be totally appropriate to get a degree from the university where John Cage used to teach. And so I wanted to attend the New School for Social Research, which, of course, by that time no longer did the music part. They'd branched out and so on. And I'll cut a long story short, which is that there was still an experimental sort of new music program at the downtown music campus at the New School, but they ended up just getting rid of it and rebranding themselves a jazz school. So I ended up at Manus, which is when I went. So now Manus seems to be, if I look at the internet, it's a very cool, very progressive place. That was not true when I went there. This was still during the era of dying European faculty who fled the Nazis and had very conservative ideas about tonal music and things. That's, in a way, the best and worst outcome. The best thing about that was the very hardcore traditional music education. So things like all the most boring terms you can think of. However, because they didn't really want me as a student because they identified me as from the other campus that they hated. So they wouldn't really give me credits. So it meant I had to find a way to graduate, and so I did a lot of private study. And that was the best outcome. But I did very odd things. Like I studied counterpoint with a guy in the Bronx, like a couple of times a week, who was this crazy old Armenian guy who was magnificent. But that sense of counterpoint study, that's brain damaging, right? But it's I'll never get over that, and I'm deeply fixated by that way of thinking, which a lot of people might not understand if they hear my music where you have, say, 2 notes and then nothing and then another 2 notes. But really, I'm actually thinking about it as these voices and things. And harmony, that was another thing. I also studied with an ethnomusicologist, private lessons for several years, which is, of course, not really useful because that's not a thing that happens in that discipline, be it primarily academic. But it was that traditional environment, I think, instilled, if nothing else, just a curiosity in music and musicianship. I am a very bad academic, though, because I have a lot of trouble taking it seriously. That's always been true. I'm a terrible student. I'm very curious as a person, but in a classroom it becomes odd. The best experience I have from that college experience would be my minor was constitutional law. And that felt like a more appropriate way of engaging with something like a classroom, and I was very into it.
But that trying to distill down creativity into a classroom setting is
that feels totally contrived. Also, I think it sets up a really false understanding. People can attack me if you want for this, but I think front-loading a person with technique, especially when we're talking about writing music, is quite honestly useless. The technique has to come after some initiating event or project or something. You can show a person any kind of, oh my goodness, it's so lame to talk about 12-tone music in 2025, but you can show a person how to make rows and things, but that doesn't really work unless there's some interest in how could I associate pitches next to each other that might not just lead to the expected ways. There has to be, I think, something first, and then you learn a technique that may or may not be helpful, but that's the problem. Front-loading a person and treating composition like a collection of tools is, I think, very stupid. It has to go the other way. You develop them out of whatever material you're working on. And that's and in so doing, then you develop unique approaches to that, rather than, I don't know, just being, quote, technically versatile or something. That would be, I don't know, it breaks my mind a little bit. I think it has to go the other way. So I'm not saying there's no virtue in learning disciplines. I'm saying it has to go after you have some initial curiosity of wanting to do something a certain way. And I would also say that's true. That might sound convoluted, but I would also say that's true of learning orchestration. You can teach a person all the ranges and all of the registral, timbral differences. It doesn't mean anything until you have some sense of what it is you're trying to do in a particular moment. And then you go, I see. And in those moments, that's where all the beautiful exceptions emerge.
So true.
But you don't know that, and you would rule those out if you just thought about it as,
according to the textbook example.
Yeah, that's right. You don't write thirds in the trombones below E because the book says. But then you think, no, I need it here because it sounds horrible and it's wonderful. It's grotesque and
exactly what it's called for.
But so it has to be the other way, I think, which is not a satisfying thing to say because that involves a lot of aimless wandering in work, doesn't it? It's very, that's terrible. We don't want that.
So when I heard about your quiet, slow, boring project, which I want to dive into in depth
please.
and the concept behind it, but just the title brought me so much delight because at some point in my career, I'm going to actually have the nerve to launch my own concert series, which the concerts are going to be titled after things that people have actually said to me or written about me, like heartfelt crowing. That's going to be a concert title. That was courtesy of a very small town newspaper, I have to say, describing my violin playing. Heartfelt violin crowing. Or the worst thing I've heard in a long time. That would be a concert title.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
Very strange, but you seem to like it.
That's great.
Yeah, and that would one of these days I'm gonna actually launch that. But yeah, I digress. Quite slow, boring. Tell me all about this project and how it evolved.
The phrase comes from the CJSW radio show, Unprocessed. Shout out to the deceased program. People would say that about my taste in especially modern chamber music. And I think it was meant to be pejorative and to hurt my feelings.
Nothing can hurt your feelings.
Laura and I just really got a kick out of that. And then it became a joke that expanded in scope, and maybe you should start a cult or something. But it's just amusing, while at the same time actually describing certain things I think are of value, which is the wonderful thing about it. So quiet, yeah. Loud music is occasionally fine. It depends what we mean by that. When I say quiet, I guess I mean something that invites listening, which, if I'm pressed on it, yeah, it is a lower amplitude, probably, in some sense or another. Slow, things that, don't go that fast. And that, I think that's just because I feel like that's above a certain pace. It seems to me that, and I should be very specific here, I am talking a lot about composed chamber music when this was an idea from those years ago. Above a certain pace, it's like it starts to be full of filigree. And I'm always reminded of a phrase there's a Scandinavian filmmaker, Roy Anderson, I think is his name. And he had this comment he said once about he wanted to make films where no frame was indifferent. And he felt that so much of modern filmmaking involves collections of sequences where the frames are indifferent to what is going on because it's about just getting through it as quickly as possible to the next beat of some kind. And I would say that is a passion of mine. But what is it to write music where you take into account each frame? And the problem is that slows down your ability to do very much, because then fast filigree scales and things, which would be, perhaps you could say, part of a texture or something, but the individual material kind of melts. And so it becomes less specific. You can't notice it as much. And the boring part is just, I get so damn sick of being pushed to entertain people. And I think we should just stop trying to be entertaining. Entertainment is, it's cheap. It's cheap, and I don't care. Everywhere. I don't know that to you. That's so something boring to me. I learned, and it amuses me to no end, that upsets everybody. When I refer to my music as boring, my God, the pushback as though I need some sort of psychological intervention. It's amazing. People are so wounded by that word. And I'm reminded of a conversation I had with Linda Catlin-Smith, who's a wonderful composer and mentor to me in Toronto. I was mentioning this phrase, this joke, and she says, "No, I love that. I love if my music could be boring too." And I thought, yeah, see, that's right, because you're sane. You're a real person. But anyway, I would say that's how that kind of came about. And then as I thought about it, sort of had something more matter of fact to say about these three words. It's also just a catchy phrase that confuses people, and I like that too.
And you can put on a T-shirt.
A T-shirt and a sticker. Yes, that's my dear friend Brianna Strong, a wonderful artist. They live in British Columbia now, but Brianna, you're the best, and you make such wonderful merch. It is so wonderful, yes.
But it is fascinating how terrified we are of boredom.
Oh, we don't want that. But see, then I have to ask follow-up questions because people don't... I agree with you. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump down your throat. I meant to, in the sense of people resist boredom. I think they're resisting introspection. I think they're resisting having to sit quietly for a minute and not be entertained. I think they're having to sit quietly and maybe confront the emptiness of their existence, the absolute meaninglessness of our lives. But we ought to think about those things. We ought to be haunted by those things. We don't have the right to check out. And I love that as an idea. Maybe that's not only done with my music, should you hate it and find it boring, but you should also bore yourself and sit on a train for a while with no earbuds, or just sit in your apartment. Don't turn anything on and just freak out for a second. That's very good. I think that's very healthy.
That's very good. Yeah. More freaking out in your apartment. This is it's so interesting to me to have this conversation, and like something that's like obviously so personal to you, and that's fine if you're writing stuff for yourself. That's quiet, slow, boring. How does that translate to
like Katie George?
Yes. Or you're collaborating with like Kensington Symphonia or some other ensembles. How do you get that across to an ensemble?
So something like the arranging of music for others. When I said earlier that I still think of it as the same idea, that remains true because I just accept, once again, like the face of each thing is different. So when, say, arranging a piece that Caity and I have written together or something, the demands of what that can do and what it wants will be different from me exploring 6 pitches for 5 minutes or something, right? And with that having been said, what connects them comes back to that thing of what can I do to find some timbre, I want to say melodic shape, some sense of counterpoint. That's all the same. So I tend often to shy away from really heavily blended timbres because I just find they become boring to me. They're gauzy and indistinct, and I like starker sounds, so that's always the same. It's also maybe a little bit more about framing the voice, so that's a fun activity.
Framing the voice. I love I love how that sounds.
Yeah, so how much can it tolerate before I'm clearly not being supportive anymore? Or what is the appropriate amount of stuff to happen here? Maybe nothing is the answer, right? Or if I put nothing here and I put something there, when do I bring nothing back? Does nothing come back? Does something become even more of the something, or does it change? And in that sense, I think about a lot of the same things, honestly. The other connection between those practices, be it the chamber music for myself or arranging, is I have a deep kind of meditating curiosity about variation, less to do with, again, boilerplate technical understanding of just increased ornamentation of a melody or something. I think human beings are very transfixed by our memory, and this serves us in the world in obvious ways, but it also, I think, damages us in equally obvious ways. Nostalgia is a kind of obsessive memory that I think holds us prisoner to certain sort of unrealities. And when I think about the traditional musical forms that are about variation or memory, it always seems related to this idea of a desperation to repeat something.
Return to something familiar.
While often not being able to do it, because we can't repeat anything. And so you think of something like a rondo form, where the idea is something keeps coming back. But for me, the interest there is, yes, but each time it comes back, it can't be the same, because that would be such a lie. That would be so synthetic. How does it start to fall apart? Or how does it start to mutate into something grotesque that is no longer recognizable while still being fundamentally recognizable? That paradox is interesting. Or things like grounded, like a chaconne or something, where you have something that's repeating constantly underneath while a bunch of random new things keep appearing over top. That, again, maybe that warps over time, and before you know it, you're lost. Believe it or not, that kind of curiosity about varying material. What sounds similar to something that just happened enough to be recognizable while not being that? Because that would be fatuous. That would be completely contrived and a lie to you, the listener. It can't be the same. Things that evolve over time, even little brass figures or something in a big band chart, how do they not remain the same? Because when I say we can't do that, I don't mean that people don't do that. I mean that just feels so lifeless. And it's like, don't do that. It's the thing that comes to me is, no, do better than that. I'm wondering if that's of any value as an answer to the question.
No, it's fascinating to think about our process and why we do things.
Sure.
Always. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
You drink out of crystal, I drink out of polyethylene, but that doesn't matter to you, to me. You write with a pencil and I write using mice and keys and screens, but that doesn't matter to you, to me. Either way, the drink is drunk. Either way, the words are written. Either way, the time is spent in thoughtful conversation. You speak with distinction, and I speak in unending hyperbole, but that doesn't matter to you, to me. Time is spent in thoughtful conversation. You speak with distinction, and I speak in an ending hyperbole, but that doesn't matter to you, to me, to you.
And so much of your work is collaborative in nature. We've mentioned multi-JUNO award winner.
That's right. She has, I think it's 98 JUNOs now. I'm not sure. We aren't sure.
And she's 13.
I didn't say that. I didn't say it.
I know, and she's wonderfully accomplished. Right from the get-go.
No, we love Caity. we tease Caity. We
tease Caity. We love.
We love Miss George, my boss.
We're talking about two-time JUNO award winner. Three. My gosh, keep up with the times. 3-time JUNO award winner in the vocal jazz category, Caity George, and you are an integral part of Caity's sound and as her orchestrator, arranger, and pianist. What goes into a successful collaboration such as that?
That's interesting. That's hard to answer. With Caity, what's so nice is that her and I share a lot of very similar subliminal instincts about things. So I'm referring to when we're performing. Very spooky things will happen where she might sing the exact same line I'm playing suddenly, and we look at each other kind of amused. To me, that's not supernatural, but it's a sense of shared instinct about what is appropriate at a certain moment in time.
And it's magical to watch. I've experienced you guys in performance so many times.
Thank you. But beyond that, we also have similar taste in some ways about certainly the traditional pop albums I made brief mention of before. So things like the Sinatra albums from the 50s and 60s or Eddie Gourmet. We both come to the table with a shared deep knowledge of those recordings and their orchestrations already. That helps. But then we also have very different, often complementary, but often just completely novel inputs. She can quote for you virtually every solo Sonny Stitt ever performed on record. I certainly cannot do that, but I can play most of Puccini's output for her if she's of any
she's
interest. Yeah, which is obviously not frequently. Those two things then collide, I think, in creative and interesting ways. So those are, I would call, the backdrop to my maybe a nice collaborative experience. But really it has to do with, I think, I mentioned my dear friend Brianna before, but her and I did a project a long time ago where we discussed collaboration as a form of disruption or a form of obfuscation of the other's desires. We tried to completely invert it to make it sound just terrible. But what emerges from that kind of experience is, I think, a better understanding that collaboration involves trusting the other people involved, be it one or more, and being willing to bulldoze your own ego most of the time. Not that they're going to demand that, but that the right path forward will probably not resemble the thing you thought initially. If you're really doing it well, you're going to find a way forward that's unexpected, but absolutely, I hate saying correct, but it certainly feels that way. It's like, that was the right thing. Doing songwriting with Caity has been a lot of fun in the last year or two, where we'll give each other little fragments, and before you know it, something comes out of it that's really interesting, but absolutely not what I thought could have been.
Right.
And vice versa. I've also got to share this with wonderful vocalist, actor, music director, sound designer, Allison Lynch. Also, not only having those shared senses of instinct, but I would say an understanding that making a thing requires allowing it to dictate its own path.
Yeah.
So collaboration to me it's the best way of doing anything, really, because you're not the only one who has to make any decisions, which is a terrible, no one wants that. It's like I go to a restaurant and I tend to just say, just pick whatever I should eat. I shouldn't be in charge of that decision. That's giving me far too much credit. Same thing.
Art will chart its own path, and we're kind of vessels come through.
That's my first big teacher in my life, Benita Marcus. She would always say, yeah, at a certain point, the piece talks back to you, and then you have to shut up and listen to it for a while. Uh-huh. And that vibe.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what is next for you as you evolve as an artist?
Oh, boy. That's heavy. I don't know. I'm astonished that this continues to be possible every day that I'm alive. I hope I'm able to keep writing something or another. Coming up June 1st is a performance, again, a collaboration. So between my dear pianist friend Chloe Weston from Ontario and Kensington Sinfonia, with a slightly expanded instrumentation. The lay term that we've come up with just to discuss this for the last year has been the piano concerto, but knowing me as you do, that probably doesn't really describe the thing. I'm calling it variations for piano and chamber orchestra, just out of simplicity. So there's big passages where only one note at a time is being delicately played, because that's, in those moments, the appropriate thing, and don't throw your weight around. We don't need another bashy thing. And then the middle section is very bashy and lots of clusters things, and that felt appropriate. But I'm just finishing the orchestration of that now. This summer, hopefully I have some time to reconsider. But no, there's a lot of arranging things next season, some more big band music.
You have an amazing album coming out that you've
Right.
been the arranger on with Katie George.
That's with a 40-piece orchestra that we recorded. I'm very excited about that. That'll be good. And hopefully that could lead to another such album in a year or two. Obviously, expensive. Those sorts of albums makes that challenging. What else? Oh, my goodness. Writing short chamber pieces still matters to me. It's just it happens. If I'm lucky, I can do 1, 2, or 3 of those a year. This past season was two. And that's fine. I'm not complaining about that. That feels, I don't know. I always think you have to have something to write about in that very ephemeral sense. I don't think you should just be churning pieces out. I think that's missing the point.
They take time to cook.
That's right. Even if it's a 4-minute piece, you should be pretty sure you mean all of that.
Every second
every
of
frame.
those
That's right. That's
4
right.
minutes.
Yeah, that's right. And to be sure about it, that's challenging. I could write a lot of crap for you that I don't mean. That's no problem. If you'd like that, you got it. Yeah.
We touched a little bit on this just jokingly before we started the very serious interview
Yes, of course.
that
Yes,
we're having
that's
now. The difference between commercial music and I guess less commercially viable music.
And the unpopular. That's right. I'm sorry if that rubs certain people the wrong way, that dichotomy. I don't know how best to describe it. I'll admit that to you. When I talk about commercial music that has such an obvious infrastructure, an industrial infrastructure around it. So I don't really mean genre, because that would involve everything from fascist country music songs about Trump or something with a very successful infrastructure around it to Katy Perry or something. There's massive, it's an industrial scale of things around it. With Katie George, yeah, that's true, right? She's
has a universal appeal, a timeless kind of sound.
Right.
Yeah.
And part of that industry around it is commerce related. I'm not going to lie about it. It doesn't mean it's not artfully done, any of it. Even the fascist song might have some fun things in it. Who knows?
I think Katy Perry is canceled now because she went.
Oh, she went to space.
She went to space.
Right.
So we don't talk about her.
Oh, I'm sorry. I hear
Just
okay.
kidding. Well. We'll talk about the other Katy.
Tate McRae, then, who definitely hasn't done anything wrong, right?
Yeah.
But I think the reason I find that unique is when I'm engaging in those worlds, I feel very not a part of those worlds.
Right.
I joined Caity at the JUNOs, for instance, and we were nominated last year. That was weird for me because I don't know who any of these people are. This is all very baffling to me. I don't see any trace of this kind of industrial support for the music I care passionately about.
Because you're in your apartment freaking out.
That's right. Sitting quietly, having a meltdown. And the chamber world and the new music world, we can get bent out of shape about certain people getting all the commissions or something, but we can't kid ourselves. We have no industry around us that looks anything like that.
Yes.
That's crazy. We are, forgive me, indie by comparison. I haven't probably done a project involving chamber music where I didn't pay for everything, for instance, because you have to, because no one...
To pay to have your own music performed. Yeah.
Because there's just no other way. Or even with grants, you rarely get to keep any. That's the dichotomy, I think, that I notice. And I'm not saying that people like Caity are rich. Her and I pay for everything, too. But there's certainly an industry that exists to help. There's labels. There's playlisting. Feldman's not going to get on any playlists. Or if he is, it would be a playlist of his own music that probably has dozens of streams a month.
In the middle of the night, yeah.
That's right. So I just observed these radical differences in community types.
Right.
Both are communities. It's not that one is purely predacious, but it's just very distinct. And often I don't really feel like I belong in either one sometimes because I don't really know how to function in either one. in different ways. I guess all I'm trying to say is I'm not sure the degree to which I'm meaningfully a presence in either one, although I keep finding myself doing things in both and wondering if anyone can tell that I shouldn't be there.
That's a very self-deprecating way to wrap up our time together.
Should I be here? Are you sure you wanted me to be here? I don't know.
But you're such a tremendous force of nature in the music industry, and your incredible contribution to the musical community in Calgary is so profound. And it's just such a pleasure to just unpack some of these things that we grapple with and gripe about and, and deal with in our day-to-day life with someone such as yourself. That's such a profound thinker. And
thank you for having me. This has been great.
Oh, but such a pleasure. And Winnie's finished her bone, and she's now napping.
This is so adorable.
I think does that mean we're out of time, Winnie?
It's a subtle nod to end.
Quiet, slow, boring.
Yeah, let's wrap this up, please.
Mark Limacher, thank you so much for being my guest today on Musing.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right, till next time. Take care. This has been Musing on CJSW 90.9 FM in Calgary. I'm your host, Janna Sailor. Thanks for joining me for this celebration of music, creators, and ideas. Musing is a production of the Canadian Music Centre Prairie Region and is heard right here in Calgary and around the world via the magic of the internet that connects us. As we end our time together, we recognize that there are more than 630 First Nations communities across the lands that we now know of as Canada, representing 50 distinct nations and Indigenous languages. In addition, there are Métis in every province of the country and 53 Inuit communities speaking different dialects of Inuktitut across the north. We gratefully acknowledge them as the original music makers, dancers, creators, and caretakers of our lands, and they continue to inspire and teach us as we commit to learning and moving forward together. I'm going to leave you now with more music from the remarkable Mark Limacher. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, thanks for supporting Canadian music and musicians in your community.